Well, hello. Sorry it's been a minute. Today, I wanted to chat about the idea of stories or the narratives we tell ourselves. In life, we learn different things through various experiences, various relationship dynamics, and ultimately they shape stories that we tell ourselves in our minds about how the world works. This happens from a super young age. And so sometimes we can carry stories with us that were formed in our childhood all the way through our life. Very few people may actually take time to intentionally choose the stories or narratives that they tell themselves internally. And so, as a child, usually we don't have much sense of logic or reason. And a lot of these stories are emotionally based. We also take things very personally when we're young because we don't understand, we don't really have much of the same capacity mentally to look at the world through another person's eyes. Empathy is a skill that doesn't grow until we're 8 to 10 years old. And so you can imagine as we're making these stories in our heads about relationships or people, they tend to be quite self-focused, don't necessarily consider what other people might be going through, and they don't necessarily have a broader sense of logic and reason. They're a little bit more focused on short-term cause and effect, or just attempting to make sense of something, to really navigate ultimately. So, an example would be if a child has a parent that is withholding affection or has very conditional affection, that child is going to learn very quickly, oh, when I do this, they don't like that. They don't like me. It's not that they just don't like the attitude or the action, they don't like me personally. And so, therefore, I need to change or curb my behavior. And this can carry on into all kinds of habits. And so, like perfectionism, right? This could very easily evolve into perfectionism because we take those primary relationships that we have in life and expand it out into every single relationship that we have. So, I think that it's really important as we're adults to take time and notice when there's hardship or challenge or some sort of emotional overwhelm, emotional trial. We can sit and ask ourselves, okay, what is the story I'm telling myself right here? Another example is, oh, that person didn't return my text, so they must be mad at me, or I must have done something to offend them. When in reality, we don't know like what's going on in their life. They could be dealing with some trial that has literally nothing to do with us, right? But instead, we have these narratives because we're attempting to make sense of the world and navigate the world. So, the cool thing about stories and internal narratives we tell ourselves is that we can choose the internal narrative. And I would say, as a practice, if you can choose a narrative that really encourages some sense of hope and resilience, you're likely going to manage emotional overwhelm a lot easier. So there's three components to resilience that are extremely important and imperative. Optimism, self-efficacy, so that's your ability or how you feel about your ability to problem solve, self-efficacy. And then the third one is positive affect. And then, like I said, you could throw hope in there as well. So if you can center your stories and internal narratives around those four things and those four themes, you're likely to be able to manage emotional challenges a lot more easily. Another thing to be aware of with stories that you tell yourself is that there's something called cognitive distortions. And cognitive distortions are irrational beliefs that can pop up and that we might try and project on all kinds of relationships or experiences and perceptions. So, an example is taking things personally. Oh, they did that because they're mad at me. Oh, that person cut me off because he didn't like my car, right? We start to pinpoint people's actions based on something about us, which is most of the time not true. Another example is to um, like catastrophize. So oh my gosh, this is going to be the worst thing, that this is going to take forever and be the worst thing that it's possibly going to be. It always happens this way. So those are two cognitive distortions at play. One catastrophizing, and then the other is saying, oh, this always is happening to me. We leave very little room for there to be an option of something new in life happening. And it also can feel very defeating. It can make life feel more challenging when we have the perception that we're always going to have to deal with some sort of hardship. We're always going to have to deal with the worst case scenario. That mentally kind of that storyline puts us in a mental place of very heavy emotion ultimately. So I would challenge you to just take note of your personal narrative that you have going on inside, and see if you can choose one that you notice more regularly, and see if you can choose it and just start to tweak it a little bit. And, I'd say start by noticing, okay, what's an overwhelming emotion that you might have? And what's most pressing, and then look at what's the belief system behind that. What is kind of a trigger to those heavy emotions? And if you can identify that, it will tell you a lot about the stories and the narratives that you tell yourself. Now, choosing a narrative can sometimes be a little bit challenging to navigate, because I think a lot of the time we number one, we're humans who want meaning and purpose in our life. We also want to avoid pain and seek pleasure. And then that puts us in this headspace of like, well, I want to know the reality of it, right? And it's worthwhile to not be delusional. That's a very worthwhile thing to chase in life. And so it's like, okay, how do we become more aware of the stories we tell ourselves, and what do we calibrate them to really understand reality or truth? And this is where I feel spirituality plugs in such a beautiful way. And the reason is because spirituality starts to take our sense of meaning and purpose and aim from what's happening right in front of us in the physical world, and it elevates it. It elevates our aim and purpose into something so much higher, so much more broad, and just beyond material. And so instead of focusing on what's happening right in front of us, we start to leave a doorway for there to be a greater and higher aim beyond what we can see and the limited timeline that our mind might be able to perceive right here and now. So an example would be, if I'm dealing with challenges in a relationship, and this is a very, very real thing that I deal with, I tend to want to solve that problem immediately, as soon as possible. As I've gotten older, I can respect people need time a little bit more easily, but overall, I have a really hard time letting problems just sit being undiscussed and unresolved ultimately. And so that kind of causes tendency to push a solution. And there was a little bit of anxiousness that would happen in relationships behind that, right? And instead of just accepting where another person was in their process or the space that they needed and really respecting them, I would push to try and find a resolution. And that would create a little bit more disharmony in relationships. So that's like if I have this not low aim, but lower earthly aim of, keeping connection, maintaining connection, having this person in my life right here, right now. But as soon as I integrate spirituality and I start to say, okay, God, what is your plan with this relationship? Can you open my eyes to what I'm supposed to learn from this? And that starts to open up a little bit of a doorway into, number one, tolerating discomfort, which is a very imperative practice to have in life. Being able to tolerate discomfort is a huge thing that can benefit you and create emotional resilience and be an emotional coping skill ultimately. But it also starts to expand out the timeline, right? So now I'm thinking, okay, God, show me what your plan is, what your purpose is. And just recently I had this happen, and, I'm praying, and I just had this kind of sense of, just be in this for the long haul, be in this for the long term, commit long term. And that kind of ideology is for me, it was really beneficial because it's not about just tolerating injustice or someone being like having unhealthy boundaries with you or not respecting your boundaries. It's not meant to minimize the importance of that. Instead, it's saying, I'm going to release my immediacy of having this solved. And instead, I am going to be open to a longer timeline of how this might evolve. And I want to maintain my receptivity as things evolve, right? So that's kind of an example of how spirituality can be brought into this. Now, as you know, if you've watched my videos before, I'm a huge proponent of the Bible, and I used to have incredible resistances to it as well. So I understand that mentality of where like people just shut down as soon as they hear about Christianity or Christ or the Bible. But really, if you read the Bible yourself and you go through really dark times in life, and if you start to try and research other ideologies about good and evil and meaning and purpose and God, there is nothing out there that is as thorough and as in-depth and as supportive as the Bible. And I'm not going to go down the rabbit trail of like the historical validity of the Bible or the incredible internal consistencies of the Bible that also seem to validate it as a text and as a resource. But what I do want to say is that the Bible being an objective resource for creating an idea of what spirituality looks like and what the thinking process of spirituality looks like is so incredibly supportive. Having this long-term timeline is a part of the Bible and the biblical narrative. There's also this idea of surrender, where it's like, okay, God, not my will, not what I want out of this relationship, but God, help me. What do you want out of this relationship for me? And what am I supposed to learn from this? And the more you get to know God through the Bible, the more you can trust God and you start to realize, okay, God, your plan is better than my plan. And people who really live this out, like people who actually practice this and apply this kind of mentality, experience amazing things, and they will validate that idea that God's will is better than our own personal will. This is something that I have seen directly in my life, and I have gone through incredible plethora amount of really intense challenges just in the past 3 decades. And so I can stand here and say that through practice of surrendering to God, like, yes, I have seen God's will for my life be much better than my own dream and my own vision for my life. And there's this practice of just surrendering and letting go of my will and my drive for an outcome, and instead being open and receptive to God's will and God's desire for my life. So that's something I always try and integrate into my own mental stories and narratives as well, is, okay, God, what can I learn from this? Also pay attention if you start to notice some pride come up in yourself. And this is something that everybody has to deal with. I don't think that there's anybody who is completely like able to just slough off the experience of pride as a human, but it takes work. So just noticing if you have a craving to be better than someone else or do better than someone else, or kind of have this like competitive streak about being right or being wrong. This is something that, oh my gosh, I have a lot of personal experience with. I have a past of being a very prideful person, and it's something that I really try and be super attentive to right now. And it, as I become more intentional and aware of my mindset, and I really start to notice where pride is popping up, it is a huge impact on the story and the narrative that I tell myself in my head about the world around me. And so a prayer that I'm constantly praying is, okay, God, like, please help me be receptive. Help me be humble. Like, I know that I'm always supposed to be learning. I'm aware I don't know everything. I'm aware I can do better at situations and just be a better human and be better at life. Don't ever find yourself in that place where you tell yourself, oh, I'm doing great. I'm not I'm not bad because I'm better than the worst person. right? This is a narrative that I used to tell myself all the time, is like, oh, well, I'm better than that person, so I'm doing pretty good. That's pride speaking. And I think at a very essence, we just have to accept, like, we're never going to nail it in this lifetime. And if you can always maintain that learner and receptive mentality with things, oh, it, like, life is a lot more smooth. Connection and relationships can be a lot more nourishing. It's easier to have compassion and empathy for other people. So really watch that pride pop up, or when it pops up, because it will definitely be in those stories and narratives that we tell ourselves if you're paying close enough attention. Well, I hope you enjoyed this chat about stories and the narratives we tell ourselves. If you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear about them in the comment section down below the video. Also, like, let me know what comes up in your mind. What's a story or a narrative that you regularly tell yourself in your mind? Or what's a story or narrative that you tell yourself that you're maybe wanting to change? Do you have any suggestions on how to replace those stories or manage those stories so they support a more emotionally healthy response to challenges? I'd love to hear what you do and if you have a personal practice with this stuff. So let me know what you think.